Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Sally McBride. I am the Knowledge Translation Manager here at the Human Early Learning Partnership. We are so pleased to have you joining us today. We have participants from around the province and Canada, excitingly enough, representing school districts, health authorities, community organizations, municipalities, and other. Today, we are pleased to have HELP's director, Dr. Kimberly Schoner-Reichel, here today to talk about children's well-being in their middle years, new research highlights. And Kim will give everyone an opportunity to learn more about what research we're doing here at HELP that's helping us learn more about children's well-being using the Middle Years Development Instrument. A couple of housekeeping items. We will be taking questions at the end of the session, but feel free to type in your questions throughout the session as they come to you in the chat function, and then we'll be opening up the floor to those questions, and Kim will be answering those for us closer to the end of the presentation. We won't be unmuting microphones this time around because we do have a large number of people joining us online today with a few people trickling in now. So we apologize for that, but this session will be recorded and will be available on the web in the near future. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Kim. Welcome, Kim, and thank you.
Great, thanks, Sally. It's great to be here, and I want to echo your comments of how excited we are to be here with all of you from both in BC and across Canada to learn more about the research we're doing here at HELP on the middle years, and specifically the Middle Years Development Instrument. And I'm just pleased, really, and just thrilled to be here to be talking about some of our initial findings from this year's MDI research. And so I am looking forward to getting some questions from you toward the end. Just to give you a bit of background, there's a picture of me for some of you who don't know, and I'm actually sitting on the 4th floor of that building in front of you in the School of Population and Public Health. So the Human Early Learning Partnership, for those unfamiliar, it is an interdisciplinary research unit in the School of Population and Public Health in the Faculty of Medicine at the University of British Columbia. And it was founded by the late Clyde Hertzman. And it really is Clyde who inspired all of us. And in fact, right now, my team and I are sitting in the Clyde Hertzman boardroom. So Clyde is with us in spirit. I'm going to just give you a brief overview of the webinar. I'm going to start off with why now? Why now do we need to start thinking about the importance of middle years and children in the middle years well-being? What now? What's some directions we can take in terms of understanding the science of the importance of the middle years? I'll then move into talking about what is the Middle Years Development Instrument, or MDI, just giving you a brief overview, and then go on and highlight some of the key findings. So I'm hoping that this webinar is really intended to be for a few different audiences. One is for people who've actually collected data from the MDI this year in their schools and communities and would like to have some background and information as they move forward and move to action, but also for others who are just interested in learning more about the MDI, as well as the importance of looking at children's social and emotional well-being inside and outside of school. I am just going to start with a quote that is one of my favorite ones, and give you a bit of a quiz that is, sort of the notion of focusing on the social and emotional well-being. And the quote is, "Educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all." Typically, I ask the audience who said this and so I'll give you a second to ponder who you think said this quote. And then one of the, as you see up there, it was Aristotle. And so the notion that Aristotle, 2,300 years ago made this case that we really need to focus in education something beyond the academic achievement, but really on educating the heart, or children's social and emotional competence, development, and well-being. And what we know now is, although Aristotle said this quote so long ago, is that there is now a real science behind this that really shows, especially in the past few years, about the importance of children's social and emotional well-being for their education and for their physical health. A number of factors, and even the recent work on neuroscience shows us how important this is. Now, why now do we specifically need to be more aware of children's health and well-being? Some of the reasons would be about the changes and challenges that children are facing in today's society. The societal risks certainly include poverty, stress, mental illness, bullying, decreases in empathy. A number of factors really showing that how many children are not reaching their potential. And knowing that too many children really need to have some aspects to focus and promote their resiliency. One of the concerns we have is stress and mental illness among our society's youth. We know approximately 1 in 5 children have an identifiable mental health disorder. We also have increased stress and anxiety among children today, in which they are confronting obstacles that are very taxing, that strain their ability to be successful. We also know of some recent science that really talks about a stress contagion. Some of the recent work I've been involved in with one of my colleagues here at HELP, Ava Oberle, as well as some research by Mielke and Warner, really are beginning to show that there's a stress contagion. And in fact, when we're around someone who is stressed, even if we don't have stresses in our life, we catch it. We actually have the negative physiological consequences of that stress. So the one study by Mielke and Warner really showed that teachers who were highly stressed, who in fact had a lack of material resources or no respect from their colleagues, had children in their classrooms with higher levels of internalizing and externalizing disorders, including anxiety and conduct problems. And in a recent study by Ava Oberle and myself, we found that teachers who report high levels of stress and burnout actually have children in their classrooms who report higher levels of morning cortisol, which is indicative of higher levels of stress for the children. Some other aspects that are happening in today's society is sleep loss or deprivation. I wonder if any of you have ever been sleep deprived. We know that this is a growing concern among children today, and in fact some of the recent data shows that we have a great sleep recession occurring. The children today are getting much less sleep than children even a decade ago, and that the sleep loss or deprivation, looking both at quantity and quality of sleep, is associated with things like obesity and diabetes, hypertension and cardiovascular disease, anxiety and depression, poor cognitive function, and even sleep deprivation looks like attention deficit symptoms. Again, really important to be aware of children and what is interfering with their sleep and the ramifications or the spillover into the classroom and other activities. And another aspect is we also know that children, that empathy seems to be on the decline. A recent study among 14,000 college students found that that empathy is on the decline, especially since the year 2000. So again, another important aspect, just to let you know, empathy has been told by some to be one of the most important of personality characteristics, because empathy not only stops you from behaving aggressively, it really is what leads you to behave more pro-socially or helping, caring, cooperating. And another aspect is how does well-being of children put in the context of Canada? So we know, for example, that in a recent study by UNICEF ranking 29 of the wealthiest countries around the world, that Canada ranks 17 in terms of child's well-being, 24 in self-reported life satisfaction, and 26 out of 35 countries on child inequality. So again, very concerning trends in where Canada is falling within the world rankings. And just for those of you in BC and those outside of BC, BC is really an interesting context in which to look at some of this work. We know there are these BC cross-curricular competencies. The K-12 curriculum is actually changing here in BC and moving into legislation in September. And now we're moving to have integration of new competencies. One of the competencies is called a thinking competency, which includes critical thinking, creative thinking, reflective thinking. And another one called personal and social competency, which is positive personal and cultural identity, personal awareness and responsibility, and social awareness and responsibility. And the last of these competencies is a communication competency. And what we know about BC, it's unique again in the world of highlighting the importance of social and personal competency is part of the regular K-12 curriculum. And again, this is an important aspect to think about how do we learn more about how children in BC are doing on these competencies, particularly on the personal and social competency. So what now? Where do we go next with this? And as we see the problems that children are confronting in our world today, as we focus on trying to promote well-being, we're really seeing a paradigm shift rather than a focus on just reducing ill-being to one of promoting well-being. And part of this is looking at moving away from intervention, where we wait till a child already has problems and throw the life preserver in, to one of prevention, equipping children with the life preserver to actually help create resiliency so that they're able to deal with those problems when they confront them. There also, alongside this movement to moving to well-being, is a movement called social and emotional learning. It's a growing movement across the world, a real focus on bringing this idea of social and emotional competence development within schools, within education, and even in after-school programming. So the idea of what we know, how important these skills are, of developing social and emotional skills alongside academic achievement. The Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning is at the forefront of this work and has identified 5 dimensions of social and emotional learning, which include 2 for self, one being self-awareness, the other self-management, other one for 2 for social aspects, which would include social awareness, things like empathy, perspective taking, and then relationship skills, being able to get along with others, negotiate conflicts. And the last one, responsible decision making, is about making ethical choices and responsibility. Now, a new way that we're talking about this social emotional learning is using the term social and emotional fitness. And in the same way that we think that physical fitness is important for us, and I'd like to remark that there was a time where we didn't realize how important physical fitness was for us to do every day, I think the science is now at a point where we can say that social and emotional fitness, practicing our skills of getting along with each other, practicing empathy, becoming more self-aware of our strengths and our problems, all of that is part of practicing our social and emotional fitness, which again will lead to success both in school and in life, as well as help with our physical health and well-being. The research is pretty clear that these skills are important not just for school, but also for career success. And in fact, research is now showing that when employers are looking for skills, they're beyond looking for the sort of basic R's in terms of reading, writing, and arithmetic. They're now looking for other R's, such as relationship skills, or even being able to manage stress and get along with others. And I'm now going to just highlight a couple of the research findings for you that I think are particularly important when thinking about the social and emotional well-being of children. There's a recent study that came out this past year in the American Journal of Public Health really showing that children with strong social skills in kindergarten are more likely to thrive as adults. The study, which was conducted by Crowley, Greenberg, and Jones, looked at kindergarten children and looked specifically at 753 children and had teachers rate these children on social skills, pro-social skills when they were in kindergarten, on things like how they cooperated, how they listened to others, how they shared, on a 5-point scale. And then what they did is they followed those same children from kindergarten 13 to 19 years later, and found that the children who were high in those pro-social skills, who were able to listen and get along with others, those social and emotional skills, were more likely to graduate from high school, complete a college degree, and obtain a full-time job. Whereas those children who were low in these pro-social skills were more likely to have spent time in a juvenile detention center, been arrested by early adulthood, had higher rates of recent binge drinking and marijuana use, and also a higher chance of being in or on a waiting list for public housing. again, showing that these social and emotional skills have a lot of traction in predicting not just well-being in the short term, but in terms of adult success. Some other research on the importance of these social and emotional skills shows that things like something called self-control or self-regulation is really predicts adult success. In a study by Terry Moffat and others actually followed the same group of children from birth, 1,000 children from birth to age 32, and found the single best predictor of how you turn out as an adult in terms of how you manage your finances, your mental health, your ability to get along with others, was predicted by how well you were able to have self-control during middle childhood. Things, and just so you know, self-control also has been called terms like self-regulation or perseverance. We also know from the science that these social and emotional skills are malleable. A recent research on neuroplasticity shows that you can actually teach children to have higher social and emotional skills. You can teach empathy. You can actually teach perseverance or self-regulation and relationship skills, how to resolve conflicts. All of these are now things that can be taught with direct instruction through evidence-based programs, social emotional learning programs. And in fact, some of the best evidence in terms of the malleability of these skills comes from a meta-analysis by Joe Durlak, Roger Weisberg, and their colleagues, who actually, they looked at 213 studies with over 270,000 children from kindergarten through 12th grade, and compared children who had had exposure to a program explicitly teaching them social and emotional skills and compared them to a control group, and found that those students who had been exposed to some sort of program in school that was targeted to promoting social and emotional skills not only had better social and emotional competence, decreased aggression, increased motivation, but they also had academic achievement test scores that were 11 percentile points higher than those students not exposed to those programs. Again, underlying the importance of the malleability of these skills. Another study, I don't have a slide on it, but I just want to share with you, is a study done by Caprara and colleagues that looked at social and emotional competence in 3rd grade and again in 8th grade. And they looked at academic achievement. And they wanted to see, would these social and emotional skills, particularly, again, pro-social empathy, how you get along with others, would predict 8th grade achievement. And what they found was fascinating, that in grade 3, social and emotional competence actually predicted grade 8 academic achievement better than grade 3 academic achievement. That is to say that how you were in grade 3 in terms of how you managed, got along with others and helped and shared, predicted how well you did in grade 8. But your grade 3 academic achievement did not predict how academically able you were in grade 8. Again, underlying the importance of really focusing on these social and emotional skills for predicting academic achievement. And the last point I'd like to make is this notion of the lasting effects of these interventions. There was one study that followed children who had been exposed to a social and emotional learning program in middle childhood, and they compared it to a group of children who did not have the same exposure. And they followed that same group of children from elementary school 15 years later, when those young people were 24 and 27, and found again that those students exposed to a social and emotional learning program not only had better success, higher educational achievement, higher economic attainment, but they were also more likely to vote and participate in their community. So lots of good findings here. We know of looking at all of these data in terms of the research on resiliency, that one of the most important aspects that predicts well-being are relationships. One of my favorite quotes comes from the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child, really underlying the importance of relationships. And as they say, as stated simply, relationships are the active ingredient of the environment's influence on healthy human development. They incorporate the qualities that best promote competence and well-being, individualized responsiveness, mutual action and interaction, and an emotional connection to another human being, be it a parent, peer, grandparent, aunt, uncle, neighbor, teacher, coach, or any other person who has an important impact on the child's early development. And this research, actually recent research on a longitudinal study, finds that one of the best predictors of well-being in adulthood Again, a 32-year longitudinal study found that it's both peer inclusion, being part of a peer group during childhood and being part of having attachment in adolescence, and also participation in extracurricular activities and life satisfaction predicted adult well-being. I just had to put in my favorite quote from Yuri Bronfenbrenner that underlines this in a nutshell, specifically, that every child requires someone in his or her life who's absolutely crazy about them. And what we know from research on resiliency is the importance of that one significant adult. And there is a vast amount of studies showing that children who have an important adult in their life have many better outcomes across a range of constructs. So what are the differences that we can make to make a difference? What can we do? Well, we've really been interested in this question at HELP for a number of years, really trying to figure out how can we learn best of how to help children. And really the place to start is having data, that gives us a snapshot of how children are doing. How are they doing on these different aspects to inform prevention and intervention, to give us an idea of where to start and where to begin. Hence, where we began with looking at developing a measure of children's well-being inside and outside of school, the MDI, or the Middle Years Development Instrument. And the MDI, briefly, is a self-report questionnaire that children complete in grade 4 and grade 7. It's online on the computer. Just for those who are interested, we spent a number of years developing the MDI to make sure it had rigorous psychometric properties, both reliable and valid. We have a number of papers that are available on the web that you can download to look at these validity studies, but it was a number of years to establish that yes, we can obtain reliable and valid data from children in grades 4 and 7. It measures areas of development and assets that are strongly linked to the research and science on children's well-being. When we convened a group to help develop the MDI, we really came first from the science of resiliency, trying to identify where we needed to look in terms of trying to capture children's well-being and the assets, those protective factors in the environment. It was developed through a collaborative process involving scientific experts, teachers, community members, etc. And even from the children, when we were developing the MDI, we went to them to ask them their advice, ask them for their advice on what kind of questions we should be asking and what are the aspects that we might be missing out. So why is the MDI important? Why is it important to start looking at the middle childhood years? What we know from research is that there's a lot that we know about birth and early childhood and even adolescence. There are surveys on all of these, and yet there was no survey that we could specifically find about middle childhood across Canada. And I believe that the MDI is one of the first measures ever developed to look at children's lives inside and outside of school using a strengths-based approach. We know that middle childhood is a transitional time, particularly 4th and 7th grade, in terms of cognitive changes, social changes, and increase in peer group, decrease in connections to adults. Academically, they're moving to different schools, and even physically with biology. You know, there's puberty is occurring. And what we know from research on transition, that these are particularly important times because they're a time of increased risk because of the stress pileup, because of the number of changes occurring in such a short time period, but they're also a window of opportunity and actually a time in terms of cognitively, there's more neuroplasticity. There's a lot of changes that occur. So we really wanted to sort of capture that time period in which we could really have the most impact in understanding of where to go. The focus of the MDI is on the whole child, looking beyond just academic achievement. And I want to say that when we began on the MDI and started looking, I began looking across Canada and found that so much of what we knew about middle childhood across Canada was on academic achievement. We really just knew how children were doing in school, but very little at a population level to have any understanding of how children were doing in terms of their health and well-being inside and outside of school. the other aspect of the MDI is we really focus on the idea of children's voices, that we can obtain valid and reliability from this measure, and listening to them. That when we want to know about their happiness and optimism, we need to really learn from them. And we found that, in fact, we can capture really important information through this self-report. And it also aligns with the rights of the child, the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, Article 12, where children have a right to give their opinion and to be listened to by the adults around them. And I also want to emphasize this notion of the importance of listening to the children and how important it is. You know, I remember when we were just developing the measure and going to the children and saying, we really need to learn from you. You are our teachers. And so I feel a particular obligation to them in really getting this information out to schools and communities, to the people who can make a difference and make changes to improve the life conditions of children. I did promise the kids, so I'm hoping you'll oblige this obligation I have and move forward. There are 5 dimensions of the MDI. The first one is social and emotional development, which includes things like optimism, empathy, pro-social behavior. We really drew from the research on resiliency as well as positive psychology to look at positive mental health. But we also included measures of sadness and worries to obtain a full picture. We looked at physical health and well-being as well on the MDI, things like nutrition and sleep, as well as how many days a week do you eat dinner with a family member. We looked at connectedness, as I told you about the importance of relationships, and both with adult relationships and peers. So we looked at connectedness to adults in school, at home, and in the neighborhood, as well as peer relationships, both feeling accepted in a peer group and having a close friend. We looked at questions on the MDI. Also asked children about their use of after-school time, where they go, how many days a week they're engaged in structured activities, sports and lessons versus unstructured, including screen time. We have a number of, we've updated the MDI to now include a number of questions about looking at screen time. But we also asked children not just what they are doing, we also asked, very unique to the MDI, and as far as I know, this MDI is the only questionnaire for children that asks this. We ask them what they wish to be doing after school, again, to really help inform programming for these children. And finally, we ask about school experiences, things like school climate, victimization, how many, you know, in terms of victimization, we look at cyberbullying, as well as physical, verbal, and social aggression or bullying in terms of victimization. So I'm just giving you a very quick overview of the MDI. It has a number of questions that we really obtain a comprehensive view. Just for those of you who are familiar with the EDI, or the Early Development Instrument, we have organized it to be that the MDI then can be linked. So a number of actually neighborhoods or school districts, we have the opportunity to link the EDI from when those children were in kindergarten, again, to the same children to when they're in grade 4 and again in grade 7. And this really helps us understand trajectories and look at change over time with children in terms of these well-being. Just as an aside, although I'm not going to talk about it in this webinar, there is a recent paper in a special issue focuses on the EDI that actually shows the linkage of how the EDI, social and emotional competence subscales, predict some of those same dimensions in grade 4. So really, again, showing both the importance of these early predictors in kindergarten, predicting in grade 4, but also evidence that teacher reports through the EDI actually predict self-reports through the MDI. Just for those of you in BC who are interested in this, the MDI also aligns with the new curriculum, the BC's new curriculum on the personal and social competency. So as an aside, I was involved in both advising the Ministry of Education on the personal and social competency dimensions, looking at personal awareness and responsibility and social responsibility. So in developing the MDI, the team and I really worked to align these same dimensions that would capture things like connectedness, self-esteem, or self-awareness, perseverance to the new curriculum. again, a really important aspect for those out there who are in school districts who want to know how their students are doing on these new aspects of the curriculum, can look to the MDI results to get a snapshot of how their students are doing. Just to show you, the MDI began in 2009 and 2010. It is a measure, unlike the EDI that has provincial funding. This is we do not have provincial funding yet, but we are working toward that. I'll just show you the years that we've been doing the MDI. From 2009, it's been growing in terms of the number of school districts that have been involved and the number of students that from whom we've collected data. And to date, we have almost over 43,000 students who have completed the grade 4 or grade 7 MDI. We also have a national scale-out project that's happening in BC, across Canada, with funding from some wonderful foundations. And as you can see here, we have just collected data this past year, not only in BC, but in the Northwest Territories, Hamilton, Ontario, as well as Nova Scotia. And the MDI is taking off around the world. Actually, we're just fascinated by how many other countries are interested in the MDI, again emphasizing the importance of this measure, of the need for having a comprehensive measure of children's well-being inside and outside of school. And again, we've been in the USA, Staten Island, and some other places, Peru, the UK, Germany, and Croatia, as well as Australia, that has been using the MDI for a number of years. From the MDI, we've created a composite of a well-being indicator. Again, the measure is a strengths-based focus, and we look at we include in our construct, we created a composite: optimism, self-esteem, happiness, overall health, and low sadness. And we present the data along 3 dimensions: thriving, which is the green, yellow, which is kind of the middle well-being, and the red, which is low well-being, or I would also call that vulnerability. So we have a well-being index that we present. And one thing that goes beyond the EDI, for those of you who are familiar with the EDI, is we also look at these key assets. And we have the picture of the soil there because these are actionable items, ones in which you could actually add nutrients to the soil of children so they can grow into healthy children with high well-being. And these key assets include supportive adult relationships, positive peer relationships, positive school experiences, proper nutrition and sleep, and participation in after-school activities. And we find that overall in our data throughout the last several years is that there's a linear relationship between the number of assets that you have and the percent of children experiencing well-being. So you'll see in this picture that if you have just 0 to 1 assets, only 30% of the children are experiencing well-being, whereas if you have all 5 assets, including the positive peer relationships, positive adult relationships, and so on, almost 90% of children experience well-being. So now I'm just going to briefly go, and really this is just a snapshot of some of our highlights from the research this past school year, and looking at some of the ones that sort of stuck out. But again, I want to encourage those of you who have your own data to present, and just so you know, there'll be some slides coming online soon that will help with the PowerPoint, and you'll have your school reports as well as the community or district reports. Here's just a list of our grade 4 participation for 2015-2016. As you'll see, we had about 4,147 students in grade 4, and here's all the ones in grade 7 that participated. Again, about 5,653 children who participated this past year. So now I'm just going to highlight some of our key findings, but again, I want to tell you this is just kind of a very quick hand wave at some of the findings that are emerging. There's much more in-depth data available in the community and school reports that you will be able to look at if you have participated this past year. So one of the key findings is that we found the key finding 1, many children in British Columbia are thriving. However, there remains a large proportion of children who are low in well-being. If you look in the grade 4, as I said, 46% are thriving, but 30% are in the more vulnerable range. In grade 7, this changes slightly, where you see 43% of children are thriving and 31% are in that low or vulnerable category. Finding number 2, on dimensions of social and emotional competence, when we looked really specifically at these dimensions, we found first a large proportion of grade 4 and 7 children are thriving on measures of optimism, happiness, self-esteem, and empathy. However, there are a significant proportion of grade 4 and 7 children who are low on dimensions of pro-social behavior and self-regulation. And in general, grade 7 students are lower on these dimensions when you contrast them to grade 4 students. And here's just an overview of how we present the data on our reports. And typically we also, this is the overall data across all the participants in grade 4 and grade 7. But when you look at your own reports, you'll notice that there's also a bar that allows you to compare it to the remaining schools in your district, as well as the provincial average. But here, as I said, you see there's relatively high rates of optimism and happiness, self-esteem and empathy, where if you look at pro-social behavior, both short-term and long-term self-regulation, both in grade 4 and in grade 7, there are lower levels on these dimensions, which I think align with, as I was mentioning before, sort of the declining empathy or pro-sociality, as well as issues around self-control in children. Which is interesting because if you think, I wonder if the sleep deprivation is interfering there, what are the factors that are making children less able to have good self-regulation. The third finding is that the majority of grade 4 and 7 students report 2 or more adults at school, important adults at school. One of the questions we ask the students is, are there any adults at your school who are important to you? And we have them actually put in the initial of the adult. And one of the reasons we do that is because children otherwise will over-report the number, and this just keeps it more valid. And we found this through research. So again, you see that a large proportion report 2 or more adults at school who are important. However, a greater proportion of grade 7 students report having no important adults at school, which I guess really aligns with research showing this decline in well-being and connecting this to adults as children move across the elementary school years. As you can see here, for grade 4 students, 72% say 2 or more, 9% say I have 1 important adult, and 18% say none. Whereas in grade 7, 51% say 2 or more, 12% say 1, but a full 37% of grade 7 students are reporting no important adults. And I think this really aligns with research showing this decline in important adults, and other research saying if you could actually keep the number of adults who are important to grade 7s, that you don't see the declines in self-esteem and empathy. And then, and that's just looking at our assets index, as I mentioned before, adult relationships, peer relationships, nutrition and sleep, and organized activities. One of the key findings is a large proportion of grade 4 and grade 7 students are high on assets related to positive adult and peer relationships and after-school activities, but relatively lower on nutrition and sleep, which aligns with that research I talked about earlier. And a greater proportion of grade 4 students report positive adult relationships in contrast to grade 4 students. So here's the grade 4 or grade 7 students, where you see relatively high assets on these dimensions, but lower on nutrition and sleep. And here's grade 7, where again you see a decline in the number of adult relationships, again, and also lower relative to the other assets on nutrition and sleep. This just highlights, as you see here, that this is connectedness to with adults and community or neighborhoods at school and at home. One really great thing, and this is, you know, if you think about sharing this with parents, I think what you see, even though parents of grade 7 students might think that the children who are now rolling their eyes at them don't care about them, the parents are still really, the adults in the home are still really important. Anyways, another important finding here. Another finding, number 5, where we find a large proportion of grade 4 and 7 children report going to sleep before 10 p.m. However, a sizable proportion of grade 7 students reporting going to sleep after 10 p.m. And approximately a quarter of both grade 4 and grade students report having a good sleep less than 2 nights a week. And again, some of the data really shows, again, 79% of grade 4 students report going to bed before 10 p.m. and only a little over half for grade 7s. And you ask them how many nights a week do they get a good sleep, and both say about a quarter say less than 2 nights a week. Again, a key finding for number 6 is although the majority of grade 4 and 7 students report being involved in after-school activities, more than 1/3 report wishing they could be doing another activity after school. As you see, a full 87% of grade 4 and grades 85% for grade 7 report participating in after-school activities, but 34% and 32% respectively for grade 4 and 7 students report that they wish they had another activity. And when we went and really, they write these in of what they want to do, and I want to give a big shout out to my team here about how much time it takes to look at these open-ended responses. But the number one, again, among grade 4 students is physical and or outdoor activities. And you're probably wondering, many of them are what? Inside on the computer or watching TV. And they're wishing for things like soccer, gymnastics, hockey, swim, and dance. Same thing for grade 7. And number one most frequently asked for wish for after-school activities is physical and or outdoor activities, including soccer and basketball, dance, and gymnastics. This to me is quite the mismatch between what children are doing and think about what we could be helping. And so they're like a childhood obesity problem in Canada and a number of problems where if we really listen to what the kids say, we might be more aligned. There's some recent research talking about sport and belonging, that 75% of children are active in sport. Participation peaks between the ages of 10 to 13 and then declines with age. Some other of the after-school activities, when we ask the kids, what are the barriers? What's stopping you from doing what you want to do in terms of your after-school activities? Grade 4s, the number one is, I have to go straight home after school, or I'm too busy. The schedule does not fit the times I can attend. And for grade 7, the schedule does not fit what they can attend, or they're too busy, or have too much homework to do. And finally, the last finding is what we found across the maps. And looking at across maps, as you know, or might not know, the MDI not only reports in the assets and these findings, we also map children on the well-being and the assets for each community. And here I just have an example of one of our communities, which is Central Okanagan, participating for the first time this year. And here you can see the green is a well-being index, so darker green, good, lighter green, lower well-being, and you can see the tremendous variability across neighborhoods for well-being, this well-being index. So you could get a snapshot really of looking at how children are doing across communities. And again, we map adult relationships, and the brown is like the soil, so the darker the brown, the richness of the soil. And again, you can see the variability in terms of adult relationships, the variability in terms of the peer relationships, also nutrition and sleep, again, lower than all the rest. You see the colors are very light brown, so even some very sandy colors there, and some, again, on the after-school activities. Some of just, in the last few minutes here before I take questions, I want to just highlight a couple of other, just a couple of remaining aspects. One is a recent study done on the MDI where we looked at found that really looking at supportive adults in school, and found that using the MDI, found that connectedness to adults in school more strongly predicted well-being than connectedness to adults at home or in the neighborhood and community, and that this connectedness to adults was a stronger predictor than socioeconomic status. So we put this in our model. And again, this paper should be on the HELP website if you're interested in obtaining it. In conclusion, for this portion is that this idea of relationships really seem to be so important in predicting children's life satisfaction and health throughout middle childhood. Now, the last point I want to make is all of this sounds good. You get a snapshot of how your children are doing, but it really does not make any sense unless you move to action. And that's really what we're doing at HELP, is not only do the science and the research to collect the data, but also helping scaffold communities and schools and others who wish to move to action. So we have a toolkit online, and it's being further developed. Who uses the MDI data? As you can see, it's a wide range of organizations, both schools, sport and rec, policymakers. And we also have although we have a toolkit that's existing, we have a much more larger toolkit that's under construction right now. And we're going to really make it collaborative and user-driven, evidence-based and action-oriented, interactive features and support, and lots of resources for how to move to action based on your MDI data. But if you want to start tomorrow, say, what are we going to do? You want to present your data. And here's a couple of the things we've learned over the years. First, to engage in conversations, try and unpack the data, understand it. How does it fit within your context? I'd like to really think of involving children, going back to them and maybe highlighting a few of the findings and asking them what they think. One way some schools have gone, for example, is when they find out, 37% of grade 7 say there's not one important adult at school. Well, the first question might be to survey the grade 7s and say, what makes an adult important to you at school? What advice can you give us? You also want to think big, but start small. Really just take on one aspect that you really want to focus on, and to learn from the success of others. And this is just some, I'm going to just give you a bit of what's happening in other communities. Revelstoke school districts have been doing the MDI data since, collecting MDI data since 2010. They have put it in their district achievement contract, focusing on supporting students' health and well-being. They've done a lot of action, even working with high school students to go and present the MDI data to the students to help move to action and learn how to promote their happiness and well-being. We also know the YWCA has been using the MDI data to think about the importance of relationships, and have been organizing some of their activities to start now having the same, for example, the same swim instructor, instead of having a different one for each year, to move up with the children and have that same swim instructor each year for the children. There's also senior staff at the Vancouver Public Library are making use of the MDI reports and maps to help inform both their staffing models and their programming. They explored the MDI data for the Vancouver neighborhoods to better understand children's engagement, and now have an middle years librarian who focuses specifically on middle childhood. And finally, another school, actually on Vancouver's West End, started using their MDI data to really focus on creating connectedness. And they actually, when they came, when we first started meeting, they had very high adult relationships in the West End, but there were and high peer relationships and high nutrition and sleep, but really low on the after-school activities. And both the teaching staff as well as the community said, oh, we need to work on the after-school activities. And I said, really take an appreciative approach. Maybe start with asking, why do we have such high adult relationships? So they spent the time really talking to each other to figure out, what are we doing with our kids to make them so connected to us? And really brainstormed and connected, and really tried to unpack that to make it even more explicit and intentional. So really thinking about how you want to move forward, choosing one and trying to figure out, what have other people done, what can we do that's really unique. And another group in Okanagan, Similkameen, actually decided that they were really low on adult relationships and connectedness, and so they decided to look a list of their students that they thought might have poor connectedness, and then really make sure they had, each adult in the school had some connection to one of those kids, to again the power of relationships. And I think again, a really important aspect of saying, here's one piece we're taking and where can we go from here. So that's my very fast presentation of just highlights of some of the MDI results, and I'm really looking forward to hearing some of your questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Kim. That was a wonderful overview. I'm just looking across at the team who are taking in some questions as they come in. So we'll just give everybody a minute or two to mull over what they've just heard. It's a lot to take in, I'm sure. But please do use the chat function at the bottom of your GoToWebinar screen.
Or the question box as well. We can do the chat for everyone to see, or the question box if you are, want to stay anonymous. We're happy to do it either way.
So maybe I'll start off with a question, Kim.
Okay. Thank you, Sally.
Out of those 6 key findings that you talked about today, which one is the most surprising to you through all your years of working in the field of SEL? Is there something that you've seen change over time that is a good news story, or something that's surprising?
Well, I think I first want to emphasize, like, overall was the if you first looked at the social and emotional competence one, is that you really saw that overall the children in BC are doing well in terms of the high self-esteem, and as well as empathy and happiness and optimism. But I was a bit concerned about the lower levels of the self-regulation, which was a greater number of kids who were in the vulnerable position on that. I think that was, and the pro-social behavior, the helping, sharing, cooperating. I thought that was one of the ones that that there seemed to be concern. One thing we didn't present here, but something I see over and over again that's not surprising, is also the number of children who report worries or anxiety. And I think that we've seen increases in that over the years in terms of the number of children who are in the vulnerable area for the anxiety. The second thing to me, and I guess it's not surprising, but it's surprising to me, is when I look at the important adults, that you see such a dramatic shift from grade 4 to grade 7, where I believe it was 18% of grade 4 say there's no important adult at school, and that jumps to 37%, triples, more than triples, in terms of grade 7 students who say there's no important adult at school. And I'm sure that a lot of teachers in those schools would be disturbed by hearing about that and wondering what is happening, and and really trying to understand that. And I think the other thing I really want to highlight again, and again, these are just such a snapshot of where we are. There's so much more rich data in the reports, but the wishes, and looking at the wishes for after-school time, again, something we've seen repeatedly is when you ask children what they're doing, so many children report, yes, they're doing after-school activities, but often they're lessons or more sedentary types of activity, where when you ask them what they want to do, as this last slide illustrates, they want to be out there having fun. They want to be outside with their friends, learning new skills, being involved in sports and other activities. And the one thing that was interesting to me when you looked at the top ones for both the grade 4 and grade 7, soccer and basketball, these are relatively inexpensive sports. You need a ball. It's not like hockey or other ones, So I think that that's an important one to highlight.
So Kim, Don McIntyre says hi, and he wonders
Hi, Don.
why the government funds DEI, why the province funds DEI and not the MDI.
Oh, that's a good question. Okay. Oh, you're going to repeat it? Let me repeat the question. So Don McIntyre from Penticton, he asked the question of why the province funds the EDI and does not fund the MDI. That's a great question, Don. Thanks. We're chipping away at that. I think when we started the MDI, it was pretty much under the radar, and I think that certainly Clyde Hertzman had worked really really tenaciously to focus on the early years and the importance of the early years. And I think that we are now at a real transitional point where the importance of children's mental health and well-being, social and emotional learning are becoming really important in our province, as well as the importance of the middle year. So I would hope that in the next little while that the province will be looking at the MDI as a great way to capture understanding of children's social and emotional competence, particularly in relation to the personal and social competency of the new curriculum. You know, here's a way in which we can capture this information. And I think, Don, we've talked about this before, but I really would like to see in the future that we have a part of our MDI reporting being specifically on the personal and social competency domain, so that schools, when they get it, and districts, when they get their information, will be able to right away have a snapshot of the MDI through the lens of the personal and social competency. Oh, and just one other thing, Don, I just want to bring this up just to everyone. We are moving into a new reporting scheme for the MDI school report. So we will, as you see in the reports, we report both the individual, both the children at the school level and district level on all the dimensions and the maps. We've now have a new system where we'll be able to give the schools their reports in a very short turnaround time. So if there's data collection, for example, November until December, we'll be able to have the school report back to the school in January.
Hi, Kim, we have another question. It's focusing on how the data is shared, and someone's asking if the data is shared with parents.
Right. So the question is how the data are shared, and are they shared with parents? So there's a couple of levels of the information about the MDI that go out to schools and communities. The first one is each school that participates in the MDI gets a private school report. So the school reports are not shared publicly. They're only shared privately, and so that usually goes to the superintendent, and the principal will get that report. Then there's the school, district, and community report, which is made public, and that's the report I was talking about that is shared actually they're all available right now on the HELP website. You can go to your community. As far as sharing with parents, we do really encourage principals and schools to share their school reports with parents. And that's why we have, as part of our existing toolkit, having some information of how to present it back to the parents, along with the slides. Certainly, we have the slides for the community and school district report available, but you certainly could tailor those. So I think it's imperative that I actually feel it takes a village to raise a child, and that the whole impetus for the MDI was to report on children's lives inside, outside of school, and to catalyze the collaborations and connections among school, community, parents, all working together to figure out how to understand child well-being and to move to action. So yeah, I think that's a long-winded answer for your question. So yes, please share.
I think we are out of time. It's 4:30 already. That time does fly. That was a great way to wrap up, I think, talking about the ways in which we can share MDI data, and especially involving parents in that discussion is so important. So thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
And to everyone, I just want to say thanks so much for participating. To Kim, thanks so much for leading us through this exploration of this year's MDI data and children's social and emotional well-being. We will find ways to share some of these key highlights and key findings that Kim discussed today through various ways, especially through social media, blogs, and the web, and we will post this webinar in the next week or so. So please stay tuned, and thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and evening.